disrupted.
America that I fought.
Weird thing to happen. Hello, one and all. Welcome to this edition of Kitz Corner. Been a fantastic day so far. So Dr. Phil went on The View, and one of the conversations that brought up was the COVID lockdown's effect on children. And while there's been still this kind of debacle on how effective it was to take kids away from school and basically put them on an online situation and get them away from their friends and family, to subjugate them to online learning, it was actually more damaging to the educational process and the learning process of children than it was saving. And this moment here where Dr. Phil explains to the ladies of The View was kind of fascinating and left them speechless. So this is from Benny Johnson saying, Dr. Phil leaves hosts on The View in stunned silence after utterly schooling them on lockdowns. Hosts panic, cut to commercial break. Because The View are very much so pro-mandate, pro-vaccine, pro-lockdowns. They have been throughout their entire process of their of the talk show. And they don't realize the economical damages, the physical damages, and the mental damages that has endured throughout this pandemic situation that countless doctors, physicians, and pediatricians have pointed out numerous studies. But they're not doctors. They're not reading up on medical records. They're just hearing from whatever tweet Rachel Maddow's posting that day, or their friends at CNN or MSNBC, wherever they're getting the source. They're not getting true, accurate medical information from medical professionals. And now here's Dr. Phil explain to them, as a psychologist, the mental instigations that happened during the pandemic situation and why it was more hurtful for children.
Like 08, 09, smartphones came on, and kids they stopped living their lives and started watching people live their lives. And so we saw the biggest spike and the highest levels of depression, anxiety, loneliness, and suicidality since records have ever been kept. And it's just continued on and on and on. And then COVID hits 10 years later, and the same agencies that knew that are the agencies that shut down the schools for 2 years. Who does that? Who takes away the support system for these children? Who takes them away and shuts it down? And by the way, when they shut it down, they stopped the mandated reporters from being able to see children that were being abused and sexually molested, and in fact sent them home and abandoned them to their abusers with no way to watch, and referrals dropped 50 to 60%. So
there was also a pandemic going on, and they were trying to save
kids' lives. Remember, we know a lot of folks who died during this. So it wasn't, people weren't laying around eating bond, but, well, you know what? We're lucky. Maybe we're lucky they didn't, because
So Dr. Phil made some excellent points there. And I didn't even know about the smartphone thing. That's like, if you think about that, that was around the time social media started emerging, and, you know, Facebook became more relevant. People were starting to get onto Facebook, and I don't think Instagram came around, but like Twitter, MySpace was still a thing. And exactly the point, like, we were seeing other people's lifestyle. We were observing other people. And so maybe deep down we felt a bit jealous. Maybe we felt, alone. Maybe we felt more insecure about ourselves. It's like watching, models and fitness magazines and the media pressures on that. Like, now social media, we have at the palm of our hands. We're seeing different influencers and commentators and people that are socially media envy that are now dealing with these complications mentally. And the pandemic made it worse because now they just influctuated kids, instead of, hanging out with their friends and, hanging out outside and having recess and being able to be a kid, they're locked inside their homes to stare at a screen for endless periods of the day. And this is all brought to you by, Microsoft and other tech companies that instituted these lockdowns, that are part of instituting these lockdowns. And Bill Gates made a fortune off the online learning system. In fact, Crystal Ball, for example, Crystal Ball, who's on record, Breaking Points, her husband, her ex-husband, not her current husband, not Kyle Kalinske, but her ex-husband, notably invested in online learning. So Crystal Ball, when she was advocating for children to stay home, you know exactly where she was leading to. So Dr. Phil made some great points there. And of course, Whoopi Goldberg then sidelines that instead of actually acknowledging what's been said, goes and sidesteps that and says, well, there's been a lot of people that died. And then Dr. Phil chimes in and says, well, do we know school children died? And Whoopi says, well, maybe we're lucky. But I know a lot of people that died. Do you know children that died? No, but I know a lot of people that died. That's, again, you're not building upon that conversation. You're just interrupting him with a pointless banter. And even, you can see Dr. Phil is like staring at, like, what the hell? Why'd you bring that up? What was the point of that? So anyway, let's watch the rest of this.
We kept them out of the places that they could be sick because no one wanted to believe we had an issue.
Are you saying no school children died of COVID?
I'm saying it was the safest group. They were the less vulnerable group, and they suffered and will suffer more from the mismanagement of COVID than they will from the exposure to COVID. And that's not an opinion, that's a fact.
Well,
and I would go on to say that it's not just kids. I'd say everybody suffered the mismanagement of COVID because they did not manage it. They exploited it. There was no management. They didn't do anything to protect people throughout this ordeal. They didn't do anything about the virus. They exploited it. They made it worse for people and exploited it for their own gains. They didn't do anything for the health and safety of anybody. And they lied to you at every point in turn. They lied about masks. They lied about herd immunity. They lied about natural immunity. They lied about the restrictions. They lied about who actually gets more infected. They didn't do debates. They didn't do decorum. They didn't publish any medical studies, treatments. They suppressed doctors, for God's sakes. The person that invented the technology that brought us the COVID vaccines was silenced out of social media, was silenced out from the medical community. The person responsible for getting us the vaccine. So, yes, they did a lot more than mismanage. They exploited the whole thing. And that's what the people at The View don't understand, that because their lives haven't been affected by this. They still had a talk show. They still went to work. They still got a paycheck from ABC and Disney. No one had to shut up their, jobs and lose their income. No one told their mom and pop stores that they had to be closed forever. No one told their kids that they had to stay at home and not get a proper education. None of them ever had to suffer through mental anxieties and depression, because they still got to live whatever new normal life they had. So it's incredible that Dr. Phil, the old talk show host, is educating the current talk show host about this pandemic. And just to show people that Dr. Phil is not crazy, even though there is some takes that I would not. I mean, Dr. Phil is a TV doctor, so it's the same as like Dr. Oz. I wouldn't take him absolutely 100% seriously, but here's where I think Dr. Phil was on the right. Because showing studies like this is from the Canadian Pediatric Society. This came out September 27, 2021. Canadian studies confirms children and youth at low risk of severe COVID-19 during first part pandemic. And that is symbolic because the first part of the pandemic, was the deadliest part of the pandemic. That was the Delta virus. That was the one that was potentially fatal. That was the one that was going to kill you. And they had a pediatric study showing people that young individuals, young children, were least likely to catch it. In fact, so least likely that they couldn't even calculate it to a numerical number. The number was so low, it was like a fraction of a percent. That's how low it was. And children were the least likely to catch this. If you look at the actual statistics and data studying this virus, the most vulnerable to it was the elderly. And they knew this from the start, but they didn't target that demographic. They did not do that purposely, again, to exploit people. They exploited this virus. How about this one? Largest study confirms children significantly less likely to catch COVID-19. That was from 2020. That was the start of the pandemic. Children and young people around 40% less likely to be infected than adults when exposed to someone with the virus, finds a study of global COVID-19 transmission data co-led by UCL researchers. And here's even CNN. CNN, which I know probably Whoopi Goldberg and the others look into on a regular basis to pretend that they're actually journalists and they're aware of the news, not just celebrities at a coffee table. CNN even pointed this out. Virtual school can be damaging to children's mental health, CDC study says. And that's from March 26th of 2021. So all this information is there. All this information is there. And Dr. Phil is basically telling you that information. He's just relaying that to you, Whoopi Goldberg, and Sonny Bilston, and the rest of the View co-host, and Navarro. I don't think Joy Behar was there. It's sad that I know these names, even though I just hate that show. He's just relaying that information to you guys so that you're aware of this information. And that was the whole point of why I looked into COVID, why I looked into the virus, why I looked into seeing what was behind the curtain. And I'm glad that I did, because this is vital information that people should know about. I'm not trying to push some anti-vaccine agenda or say that people died from COVID is nothing. This is important, vital information, because the catastrophic damage that followed after that is more significant. It's even more significant after the pandemic, because we weren't aware of this. We weren't told this directly. We've been lied to and continue to be lied to about important information like this. And now we're seeing it out in the open. There's school kids that are going back to school that are not caught up on their reading and writing skills. There's school kids that are failing in math because they weren't taught proper math when they were at home. They weren't getting the necessary treatment to have a proper education. And you can't teach every kid through a computer screen. You actually need to interact with that child. You need to actually teach them, educate them, help them, guide them, and learn. And each child learns differently. And that's what failed about this. They tried to do a mass kind of blanket education plan and throw it out to children. I know kids that, were locked down during the pandemic and tried to get an education, and they couldn't. They could not. Because they couldn't talk to their teachers. They couldn't get one-on-one support. Their parents had to work, so they couldn't even get help from home. And they were screwed. They were literally left out there to deal with it themselves, and they couldn't get a proper education. And because so, when they went back to school, they fell so far behind. And that is what happened. So Dr. Phil was not making, weird kind of conspiracies about ignoring kids or saying that people that died are less significant. He's providing information from a psychological standpoint. And The View just does not get it. Because The View didn't really sacrifice a lot during the pandemic. I mean, Joy Behar may have been fearful going on a subway, but also Joy Behar, I don't think ever goes on a subway periodically. Like, I imagine The View has their own drivers and chauffeurs and taxi cabs. I can never see them enduring public transit. Unless it's like a Justin Trudeau kind of stunt where they wear lowrider jeans and pretend to be like hip. Like, oh, look, I'm one of you. But that's where Dr. Phil is one ahead compared to other talk shows when it comes to information like this. And it's sad that he had to get away from daytime television. And maybe it's a good thing that he no longer has his daytime talk show to provide people with this.